Hello, and welcome to another episode of AI in the Classroom Daily. This is a podcast helping educators make sense of AI without the hype. I'm Dan Cogan-Drew, and transparently, I use AI as a thinking partner in preparing each of these episodes because I think the best way to talk honestly about AI in education is to work with it openly. So today's episode is about a piece that ran in Tech and Learning on May 4th by Steve Bowley. Bowley spent more than 20 years as a technology director, high school principal, and superintendent. He now runs the online education doctoral program at Winona State University in Minnesota. His piece argues that in an AI-rich classroom, teacher content knowledge matters more than ever, which is an argument I've been thinking about for a while and one I made myself in a piece for EdSurge back in January. What caught my attention in Bowley's piece was not the overall argument, but the example that he used to make it. He describes a recent published book on AI used in the classroom. He doesn't name the book, and I won't either, because the point really is the pattern, not the publisher. In the book, AI generated a comparison between civilian casualties at the Battle of Gettysburg and civilian casualties in Gaza in 2024. The comparison made it through the editorial process, it was published, and Bowley, reading as a historian would, flagged it because it was historically incoherent. That's the example I want to spend today's podcast on because I think it names something I've been worried about for a while now. Not whether teachers and editors matter, but what happens when AI-generated content that's wrong in a particular way starts reaching teachers and students. So let me walk through the content here and take my time doing it because I think that's part of the point I want to make. Gettysburg was a 3-day battle in July 1863 between two regularly uniformed and disciplined armies, the Union and the Confederacy. Both sides wore identifiable uniforms. Both followed recognizable command structures, and the battle produced roughly 50,000 military casualties, killed, wounded, captured, or missing. In the 3 days of fighting on and around a town of about 2,400 people, there is one documented civilian death directly caused by the fighting. That person was Jenny Wade, and they were killed by a stray bullet while kneading dough in her sister's house. Other civilians died from causes related to the battle, a shell that exploded days later, illness brought on by the shock, but those deaths are categorized separately from the combat fatalities. Now, the historical record is clear. Civilians were not the casualties of Gettysburg. Soldiers were. Now, to Gaza in 2024. The concerns there, and these are the concerns that the AI-generated comparison was apparently trying to engage, involve a fundamentally different kind of conflict. Combatants without consistent uniforms, military and civilian populations geographically intermixed, opposing forces frequently unable to distinguish who was a combatant and who wasn't. The civilian casualty toll is itself a matter of active dispute with sources and figures all contested. So the comparison fails. And it fails not because Gaza and Gettysburg are different at scale, though they are, but because the entire structure of what produced civilian casualties is just different. At Gettysburg, two armies in uniform fought each other in a place where most civilians had evacuated. In Gaza, the question of who is a civilian and who is a combatant is itself central to why so many civilians have died. The two events share the word casualties, but you can't take the comparison much farther than that. Now, this is the part that I really want to emphasize, is what I did was 2 minutes of content area scrutiny. It wasn't graduate level historical research. It was basic familiarity with what the words are referring to. A history teacher would do that in their head, probably faster than I just did it out loud. And that's the whole skill that we're talking about here and what this moment, I think, requires. So what's going on? AI is generally good at producing comparisons that are structurally plausible. Two events. Both involve military engagement. Both involve civilian death. Both have generated public concern about civilian harm. The shape of the comparison feels plausible. It has the rhythm of analytic writing, compare and contrast. It reads the way an essay reads when an essay is doing that kind of comparison work. But what's missing is the content. The content is exactly the layer that AI doesn't reliably operate at because it's pattern matching across language, not reasoning about what the language actually refers to in the world the way a human would. And that's why the comparison made it through the editorial review. The editor, reading for clarity, for prose quality, argument structure, among other things, would see a comparison and they'd recognize it as doing what comparisons are supposed to do. What you actually need is a reader with historical knowledge to flag that the comparison falls apart under content scrutiny. For whatever reason, the editorial pipeline in this case didn't have a reader with those skills applying them to this text. If it sounds familiar, It should. We've been here before on this podcast anyway. Back in March, we did an episode on a horror novel acquired by Hachette where roughly 78% of the text turned out to be AI generated. 3 AI detection tools flagged it, and it was published anyway. A few weeks later, we talked about AI slop reaching children's media, videos teaching children that red means stop and green means right with visuals that don't match the audio. Each of these, I think, is the same underlying story. AI is producing content that looks legitimate enough to pass, and the human gatekeepers who should be catching it are either overwhelmed, under-resourced, or don't have the right kind of expertise at that point to do the job that they're being asked to do. Now, a horror novel that reads as a horror novel still does its job, even if a lot of it is AI generated. AI slop in a children's YouTube video is more serious, though, because young children are forming basic associations, and bad associations are unproductive, if not harmful. The Gettysburg comparison is something different. It's a published book about how to use AI in the classroom. It's going to be going to teachers as part of professional reading. And if any of those teachers brings the example forward to students, then the error starts to inform what students believe about Gettysburg, what they believe about Gaza, and what they learn about how to reason with historical comparisons. So let me break this down for 3 audiences. For classroom teachers, I think the practical implication is that AI-generated content that arrives in your materials needs to pass your own content area lens before it reaches students. You can't just check it for factual accuracy and isolation. That will catch obvious errors. The harder check is the one that the author of this paper did, Bowley, is whether the comparison holds up when you ask about each side of the comparison what it actually is. Is the comparison a plausible one, or is it just fluff? For instructional coaches, the Gettysburg example argues for involving content area teachers in reviewing AI-mediated materials. You can't just have instructional generalists. A reading specialist is going to catch different things than a history teacher will catch. A science teacher is going to catch different things entirely. So when you're vetting AI-generated lessons, scaffolds, or comparisons for use in classrooms, you have to be careful about which teacher is reviewing which materials. And for district leaders, when you're evaluating these AI-mediated curriculum products, and they're an increasing number, vendor materials or AI in education professional learning, you really have to double check on the content review chain that it has the subject matter expertise that you're expecting that it does. When the product says reviewed by educators, that can mean a lot of things. Reviewed by a historian for the social studies materials means something very specific. You deserve a clear answer, and you should ask vendors that specifically. So a question for our audience. When you have taken a closer look at AI-generated comparisons or analogies in instructional materials, did they withstand scrutiny or did they fall apart? What subject were you teaching, and what gave it away to you that this was a false comparison that was being driven by AI's compulsion to arrive at these kinds of analogies, even if the facts behind the two things being compared don't support them? We'd love to hear how these materials are showing up in your classroom. Please drop us a note in the comments. That's what we have for today. As always, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on AI in the Classroom Daily.